I left off in the last video with this slide explaining what the security characteristic line is. And that is a plot of the security's predicted excess return, excess meaning that amount of return over the return of the risk-free asset, T-bills, predicted excess return from excess returns of the market. So the stock market has an excess return over T-bills or the risk-free, and if a security returns more than the market, then that is an excess return over the market returns, and that can be plotted with the security characteristic line. Here we have the security characteristic line for Ford Motor Company, and you'll notice on the y-axis we have excess monthly returns for Ford, and on the y is excess monthly returns for the market index. Now both of these are excess over the risk-free asset, both of these scales. And this security characteristic line here is what's called a regression line, or a line of best fit. It best fits or best represents these data points. These data points are monthly plots that plots Ford's excess return for that month, and the same one is plotted to show the market index excess monthly return over the risk-free. And our XY intersection there is 0, 0. So if anything that plots in this upper right quadrant means that the market index had an excess return that month, as did Ford. And if it plots any of these data points here, the market had a positive excess return, but Ford had a negative one because they're plotted along the Y. So the line of best fit, like I said, best represents this data. You should know what a regression line is, and that's what it is. It actually, regression is a computerized statistical tool that measures the distance between each point, like here, to a line, and takes the square of that, and so the tool minimizes the squares of the distances from all the points on this side of the line versus this side of the line. Minimizes the differences between those squares. That's the line of best fit. Okay, we're going to stop in the middle of page 169, and you can skip from the heading Statistical Interpretation of the Single Index Model all the way to page 178, and we'll pick up with time diversification. So it's interesting that the majority of financial advisors believe, it says here, that stocks are less risky if held for the long run. I've heard that many times throughout my career. There's an interesting study beginning on page 178 in the book about time diversification. And in it, they assume that market returns will be independent year to year, but they have a mean annual return of 5% and a standard deviation of 30%. And building on those statistics, along with some other assumptions, this is the outcomes of that statistical study. Now, this is not based on historical returns, rather on just independent returns with a mean annual return of 5%, standard deviation of 30%. But here's what it shows, is that the standard deviation of total returns gets higher as the investment horizon, that's how long you're going to be invested for, lengthens from 1 to 30 years. And you remember we talked about value at risk in chapter 5? This is a measure of downside risk, the worst loss that'll be suffered with a given probability. So, and this is when I talked about the black swan events down there in the left side small part of the tail of the normal distribution. Well, if we get down to the 1 percentile of the normal distribution, the worst 1% cases, and look at the cumulative loss of those cases, you can see the loss. This is the potential loss, almost 48% for a 1-year holding period, 82% for a 10-year holding period, 90% for a 30-year holding period. So you can see that the amount of loss an investor might incur actually grows with a longer time horizon. That's the percentage loss to the portfolio. So this disproves the idea that risk gets lower with longer investment horizons. So I just thought that was an interesting way to conclude this chapter. And I apologize for the length of these videos, but this was a pretty complex chapter, but you made it. Congratulations. So again, I want to remind you to control the things you can control. We can't control what the market's going to do in the future, but we can control how much we consume and how much we save. So I want to encourage you to spend less than you earn, save the rest, and invest. I'll see you in the next chapter.